I wanted to go to the game between Firouzja and Anish Giri. And this game was played in the first half of the tournament, and Firouzja was kind of a sensation as it's 16-year-old. Uh, he was a kind of a pre-tournament favorite, along with the obvious Magnus Carlsen, Fabianos of the world. But really, this was, his kind of coming out party. Firouzja at 16 is so inexperienced. Like how was he going to do against, like this tough top competition each and every day?
Right.
And he just inspired us. He came out, and at one moment he led the tournament all by himself. And
Yeah,
then it was
for at some moment you start to get these feelings like, wait a minute, is he just gonna gain like 30 elo, beat everybody, win this first super tournament?
yeah, world number one, new number one. And then he had like murderer's row. I mean, it was like a Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano, Vishwan, and Viswanathan and on back to back to back.
Oh man,
You
don't
know, he
envy that schedule.
yeah, he castled long, but then he righted the ship, and again, I think he had a very inspired performance, and this game very much did it for him, and it kind of is a game that reflects in a nice way, I think, on both uh, players. For Anish Giri, who lost the game, uh, it kind of it injured his tournament a lot. It kind of tumbled himself down in the score table, and kind of really hit this old self confidence. But on the other hand, Anish really outplayed Firouzja for quite a while, and it just goes to show that sometimes to do really well in a tournament, you just need to be lucky.
Yeah,
And on top of all of those things I just said, this had a really extraordinary endgame that I want to share. Shall we
perfect. We
go?
got we got Eddie Barber in the chat as well, username the Endgame Magician. So I believe
Okay.
he, among many, will appreciate this one.
Oh, well, definitely. Okay, so here we go, everybody. So Fallujah, and today, like D2, D4 has become, at least, I want to say 50%, but there was a time where E2, E4, like Anatoly Karpov, and when he was world champion, he led with one E4 and wins, right? And everybody said, I want to be like Bobby Fischer. I want to be like Anatoly Karpov. So E4 at one time was the dominant open move, best by test. Today, D4 has become, I want to say, the slight favorite. What's your take, Aman? Do you think D4 has kind of like the slight majority?
I always have the impression that E4 is more classically sound, and
Hmm.
continues to, let's say, yield the most book advantages.
Right.
Just raw evaluations of the position, like E4, sort of best by test for that. But it's also a victim of being the most explored and obviously the most studied and most played. So
Right.
I am getting the feeling like D4 is seeing a resurgence for that reason a little bit. And it sort of depends on the trend at the time. I mean, there's definitely a period of time where, all of a sudden Magnus has sort of revitalized this Sicilian Rossolimo for black. And, it's something that most people
Baryshnikov.
would pretty much never deem, playable at certain points over the last 10 years. So it sort of
Right.
depends who's the top player and who's sort of in charge at the time, because it's also fair to say that Magnus himself dictates a lot of where theory is going, just individually, which
Sure.
is crazy to think about. But I think it's like that in a lot of things, video games as well. Like the best player in the world. Hey, if he's like playing this character, I mean, all of a sudden it's going to be the most popular character in the entire game. So it's
I,
the
I,
same with
I want to
chess.
I want to imitate the champ, and definitely Bobby Fischer. Anatoly Karpov, Garry Kasparov, all of those three players in their heyday, e2, e4 was their go-to, killer opening move. And as you say, I mean, it became so, the theory became so developed. The study is so complex and deep that I think that a lot of players that, like me, who went to the English defense, were looking for a respite.
Yes.
We were we were just we were not fanatics. We didn't have the time to to study the Najdorf to move 25 and things. And D2 D4 is a bit of a respite. But having said that, oh boy, there are some incredibly complex defenses, including the Slav uh, Botvinnik pawn sacrifice, for example. And Anish Giri is, he belies his age. He's actually very, very young, younger than Magnus Carlsen, in fact. We used to call him Baby Grandmaster. We don't call him Baby anymore, by the way. He can mix his opening defenses incredibly well, of whether he's playing Grunfelds or Slavs or Queen's Gambit Decline. It's really hard to nail Anish down. And I think that he would be a very, very formidable match um, player. I would not want to play Anish in a match because just so hard to catch him in the opening.
Yep.
Well, Firouzja's going to do his best, and he's played knight c3, bishop e7. Now, I really want to call the bishop e7 move. Really, it's like the Armenian defense to the Queen's Gambit Decline, because the Armenian school of chess really advanced a lot of the ideas behind bishop e7. And the idea is that in the line where you just play a normal Queen's Gambit Declined, like
Yep.
this, there is a problem. The problem is that in the old classical line, this knight on g1 can be flexibly developed to the e2 square, so that once the knight gets to e2, you can then play f2, f3, followed by e3, e4. And I
One of my
really,
favorite variations in all of chess.
really,
Yeah,
well,
with
there you
white.
go. And Garry Kasparov, amongst others, has proven against Anatoly Karpov that line really does have a lot of venom to it. So the idea behind the move bishop e7 is it says to white, look, if you want to play a Queen's Gambit Declined with bishop g5, I'm going to invite you to use your tempo wisely. What you're going to do? Well, of course, you're going to play knight f3, and now I'll play knight f6, and black has adroitly sidestepped the whole issue of knight on g1 to e2 variations.
Yep.
So there you go. So bishop e7. So what's the kind of drawback of the move bishop e7? Well, let's say in this position, if white had, for example, played the move bishop f4. Well, not bad, right? It's kind of like a London system with a surprising inclusion of the move c2, c4. Well, the problem is with the immediate bishop f4 is, what are you going to do if the guy just opposes bishops and offers to trade?
Yep.
It's like, well, I mean,
Nothing special.
this move doesn't really inspire, right? So knight c3, bishop e7, from white's point of view, white says, aha, now I'll play bishop f4 and bishop d6. Well, that's going to be a loss of a move. c6. Queen, pardon me. So the move c6. If black had immediately played, if black had immediately played the move bishop f5, sorry, I want to drag the bishop to f5, there is a problem with queen b3. Sorry. Now
Major problem.
Yeah, major problem, as both the pawns on d5 as well as b7 are hanging. I'm aware that there's a very long line. It was from the days of Michael Botvinnik, continue like knight c6, and trust me, the variation goes for a long while. That goes like this. Oops, sorry. Come on, come on, Yasser. Sometimes I have to grab the knight and
With extra force.
yeah, exactly. But c7, c6 prepares the move bishop f5, as the pawn on d5 is now adequately protected. Queen c2, preventing the bishop from, freely developing. Knight f6, e2, e3. And now, from white's point of view, if white could get in the moves bishop d3, knight to e2, he's back in business. If black doesn't do anything to disrupt that scheme of development, it's been established by multiple grandmaster games that white is for choice.
Right.
So black has to make an effort to disrupt white. Knight h5. All of this is pretty well known theory, and it's been known for quite some time. Here, of course, if you capture the knight with a move like, sorry, just a second, bishop, the knight can either go back immediately to g6, and it's sort of like you've traded a bishop for a knight, or the knight could go back to d7, and then onwards to f6. And again, white has just lost his dark-squared bishop without really achieving anything. It takes g6. Now again, if black has just allowed the opportunity to withdraw his knight, he's won the two bishops and he can face the future with confidence. So all of this has been, again, I'm not going to say hundreds of games, but it's a well-known variation. Okay.
Would you agree that this definitely looks a little bit abnormal to, I mean, usually you look at most double pawns on the H file with like a 75 to 80% dislike rate, maybe higher. So
Maybe higher.
maybe
Yeah.
higher.
Yep.
So, it's like a voluntary thing. Black's playing G6. He's saying, this is exactly what I want from the opening. So, I mean,
Mhm.
how do you justify that, really? I mean, the theory has just become so interesting lately that some of the things you just never dream of are suddenly the main things that we're supposed to play. It's like, what the heck is Black doing here? Somehow it's theory.
Exactly. So the way I would look at it is as follows. Black has no question about it. I'm with you 100%, Aman, has seriously compromised his pawn structure. His pawn structure is crap.
Right.
Looks really bad. The pawns are doubled, and the f7 pawns is no great shakes either. Okay. So one way of thinking about it is black has made a gambit. Black is maybe not down material, but he's definitely gambited his position in some kind of way. His pawn structure is so badly compromised that you could say he's gambited some material, if you will. What has he gotten in return? Well, he's got the two bishops, not bad. As ugly, and trust me, I'm with you 100%. As ugly as the pawn structure is, there is the opportunity that this pawn could actually be some kind of a useful, I want to say useful attacker, especially if white were to castle kingside.
Yep.
Secondly, if black could actually get in the moves, and they're going to come pretty quickly, bishop e6, queen a5, and castles long, black is actually going to have a very safe king. So in the opening, as we know, there are only a few goals. The first is that you want your fair share of the center. You want to control, the 16 squares in the center of the board. And you want your fair share. The second thing you want is effective piece development. The bishop on e6, the bishop on e7 will be pretty good. The queen on a5, not terrible. And the third thing you want is king safety. So in return for this damaged, ugly pawn structure, black is getting something. He's getting the two bishops, effective development for his pieces, and a safe king. And again, this is kind of like one of those opening positions, like there are positions in all the kind of mainline Najdorfs or Grunfelds, where at the end of a long variation, you come to a moment and you make a judgment call. Who stands better? Why? Right? And this is like one of those moments where you have to make a judgment here. And here Firouzja shows that, his age being what he is, he just doesn't know enough. This is a bad move. Knight on G1 to E2. Are you familiar with John Watson's book on, like, how's it, mastering strategical ideas? Do you know
The ones I read from John Watson were usually about the
English?
French.
Yeah. Okay, so this was, let's say, a 10-year-old book. It's like it's kind of like a Nimzovich rewritten, if you will, from a 21st century point of view. And I think it's a really excellent book by John Watson. And in that book, one of the things that's very interesting that John talks about is this idea that when you have the knights and your opponent has the bishops, you're compelled to force the action. That is to say, when you have the knights, you can't just maneuver and sit around, because the very nature of the bishops is that as pawns are traded, the bishops will find really good diagonals. So you've got to force the action. And in this move, white does not force the action. The only move, as far as I know, that is good for white is the move castles. Okay? So the idea behind this move castles is that you want to play the move e3, e4. You want to take advantage of the fact that this rook is brought into the play vis-a-vis the queen. Now, extraordinarily enough, modern theory says that the best move for black is the move queen d7. Did you guess that one?
No, from over here.
No, from over here. Okay, so the idea there is you're looking to play either queen f5 or queen g4, offering a trade of queens or bearing down on the pawn on g2. And again, there is a lot of theory that goes into these moves that I'm just putting up on the board.
Right.
And I encourage everybody watching to check the theory books, if you will. The problem with the move knight on G1 to E2 is we can go back to the discussion that we were just having about this terrible pawn structure by black, right? The pawn on F7, the pawn on H7, this pawn on H5. And with the move F7, F6, which, whoa, that's a counterintuitive move. That was a very, very unexpected move. But once you look at it and you go, really? Really? Ooh, that's
Starts to make some sense.
kind of a good move, because black is getting rid of a very ugly pawn, this kind of isolated pawn, for this potentially useful double pawn on the e file. Like white may have had ideas of f4 and f5 and f4 and e4. And so you're getting rid of that potential hostility that white had. You're trading off an actually a decent pawn on e5 for a poor pawn on f6. And after this trade, suddenly you see this bishop is actually, hey, not too shabby. And remember, I was talking a moment ago about the necessity for black to castle long, for black to get his king into safety on the queen side. Once the bishop got to f6, you could say, well, imagine black put his king on h8. That bishop on f6 would be very, very nicely protecting the king along the diagonal. And that's exactly what happens. And Anish, in the next few moves, simply takes over the game. Rook d1, castles, castles, king h8. Now we can see what Anish is up to. He's getting ready to utilize the g file, put a rook on g8.
Yep.
This pawn on h4 could become also a very useful battering ram. If in case white were to try to stick his knight on g3 to protect the g file, h4 would boot the knight away. So Firouzja sitting there saying, I don't want to see my opponent play rook g8, bishop h3, queen e7. He's got to force the action, right? So far, so good, Aman? Any question?
Also, I mean, the toughest thing I bet to understand about the bishops is that yes, you have to force the action, but usually when you force the action, let's say, you also open more lines. So it's kind of hand in hand that it always requires a delicate touch to like e4 blasts open the position and looks good because the queen's sitting on d8, but at the same time, once those pawns get traded, let's say the light squared bishop, even the dark square bishop as well for black, let's say they find their way to g7, g6 or something are going to be pretty strong just looking at all the open space on the board. So that's probably the hardest part, I guess, is just timing. But that's always the case with chess.
Yeah, and I think that is the experience factor really comes in, and you start to talk about that too. And here, I think for a lot of players, they might look at this position and in their mind's eye make a justification for the move b4. Somewhere, in their memory banks, they've been told about the minority attack, right? And they're thinking to themselves, well, I'll play a move like b4 because that hurts black's majority. And then you start to think, well, it's not really, black isn't really using his majority so much as black is ready just to, make an all-out frontal assault.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute. You're playing positional niceties that have to do with majorities, and your opponent is going to rip your head off
Going for
on the
mate.
inside. So e4, but now you got to calculate the consequence of d4. And again, the game has become a really sharp Donnybrook because both players are having to calculate lines that go with f4 and e5. And is this pawn going to be a weakness on d4, or is it a strength or a liability?
And it also sort of reminds a little bit of the like the French lines sometimes in the advance where black plays knight h6 and ends up taking g takes h6 and eventually plays
Right.
f6 to undermine the center and the bishop arrives there. And you would maybe approach the same way, remove the h pawn, get the king over, have these ideas of the g file, but ultimately a lot of the play is dictated in the center because it's still all about the center, even though black, as you have been mentioning, has he has other ways to try to play. You could go all out on the G file there, but you can't really do that without taking care of the center and the tactics there
Exactly. You
first.
want to make sure that the center is fixed. And by the way, what you just did there is what all the top grandmasters in the world do. And for all of the amateur players who are on the stream listening, what Aman just did is he took a pattern from the French defense where he got the double H pawns and related it to the current position, and he's using that experience, that pattern recognition that he has from another opening, and applying it to, hey, this is a Queen's Gambit. Mom, this isn't a French, right? But no, 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 no. It has these similarities. And every grandmaster in the world, every one of them, goes through that process. And it's very important that you have that memory, that you carry that understanding, like whatever openings or defenses are your favorite, related to positions that can come about from a completely different move order, and that is a great strength. So you just did it very naturally there, Aman, but I can't emphasize that enough, that when these world champions are studying for the candidates tournament or the world championship matches, that's what they're doing. They're comparing these ideas from different openings and different defenses and trying to create something new.
Well, that's the only way sometimes to approach a position where you have never seen it before and you've got no clue what's going on.
Exactly. Okay, d4. Knight f4, as I wanted to say, Firouzja was calculating, should he play f4, should he play knight a4, and he had it in his mind that what he wanted to do was get a setup with one knight coming to e2,
Right.
and the other knight coming to d3. So that way he would be prepared to be able to play f4 and e5. So essentially he gets his knight out on e2 out of the way for this knight. Another way for him to play, and I think a better decision would have been for him to bring his knight back to b1. The idea here is, when you start to look at the structure, the knight on c4 is actually really nice when you start to look at black's structure, because with the knight on c4, white could aspire to play e5.
Right.
All right, but slight mistake by Firouzja, but now a very big mistake by Anish. Anish played the move bishop e5, which essentially this move pushes the knight to a square that it really wants to go to on its own. And here, Anish should have played h4. And the idea is that if we just play the most natural moves in the position,
Yep.
we can see that black's bishop, it's actually black who is getting space. Black's bishop, his pawn structure, is actually giving the second player an advantage. Let's see what happened in the game. Is he played, yes, bishop e5, the
Right.
knight to d3, the bishop dropped back to g7, knight e2. So Firouzja's getting what he wants now, but still, I think that black is for choice.
And people
Yes,
might not
but
know, so they might not appreciate, because they can't see how much preparation time Yasser puts into these master classes, man. Like
Yeah.
I'm privileged to look at these nice uh, worded annotations that Yasser puts after each move. You guys don't get to see that. You just get to listen. But I mean, Knight E2, youthful optimism. Yeah, this is nice. Knight E2, Yasser says, youthful optimism. White sets his sights on attacking and winning the d4 pawn. Should this attack and capture fail, however, the e2 knight is in danger of becoming useless. Therefore, I would have preferred, and you
And
present
that's
a
where
variation.
yeah, knight b1. Exactly. Youthful optimism indeed, because as you so poetically read, if the knight on e2, which is attacking this pawn on d4, if it doesn't fulfill its mission in capturing that pawn on d4, the knight on e2 is basically it's not it's not it's not a pretty knight. It's not a pretty sight, Aman. Just look at it. And especially when you take into account this move by black, h4, this knight basically is on a really nasty circuit. Can't go there. It's
Yeah.
probably uh, not really going there. It's going here. This is it. It's taking that pawn. If it doesn't, you're going to play king g1, knight g1, and the knight on e2 is going to be, really scrambling to play a role in the game.
Right.
So that was what I was asking you a moment about. Is like I can't, I can't broadcast to our audience the annotated games, can I?
You can't broadcast them? What do you mean? The
Well, I mean,
annotations?
I can't just say here's a URL somewhere they can download, because if they go to chess.com and they go to this game, can
We
they?
we could definitely maybe get some of the guys like Mannered Monkey to orchestrate a system where we just invite every single person onto our analysis board, and it'd be like a chessbrah yacht party, and we all jump on the same analysis board and appreciate the
that
words,
that
the
would be cool.
annotations.
So instead of having like five pairs of hands, we could have like 2,000 pairs of
Yeah, yeah.
hands.
Everyone's drawing arrows. Yeah.
Okay, that yeah, I could see that might have a drawback. There's a fault in there. I can imagine. But okay, because it would be nice to share the annotated game. Anyway, 92. Let's move on. H4. Again, this pawn can become a pretty useful attacker, uh, creating some light square weaknesses if white allows h3. But at the moment, it is also really freezing the knight on e2. So h3, queen e7, attacking the pawn, e5, rook d8. And again, you can see that the battle is really over this pawn on d4. If white does manage to win the pawn, he's going to win the game. If black holds the pawn, you can see this bishop coming to f5. It could be to black's advantage. The position could be turned completely around. f4, bishop f5. And here you can start to feel that the knight on e2 in particular, right?
Yep. Rough.
Youthful optimism, I called it, right? Okay. King h2. I write. The position is settled down. Black has a fine light square blockade with whispers of kingside play as well. Therefore, I prefer black's position. Any questions from the audience that has stood out for you, Aman? Everybody?
Yeah, there was one just recently from Paul Kukowski, and I think he's really enjoying the masterclass. He says, "Is Yasser
Thank you.
single? Asking for a friend."
No, I've actually been married for a couple of decades. Yeah, my relationship with Yvette's getting pretty serious. I think I'm gonna have to buy her a present for her birthday. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
she
yeah.
she definitely deserves one for letting the rambunctious Canadian bras steal you, more than from time to time. So she puts up with us, and we're
Uh,
definitely appreciate Yvette.
the chessbrah, Yvette's dealt with quite a lot of cast of characters that have stayed. The chess world, boy, I tell you, the chess
Right.
world really, we're special. We're special, and I just want to say that our guest room has been visited by some very unusual people, and Yvette's put up with it all the way through. And it really, really helps that she's a chess player too.
Yep.
Okay,
She could
so
probably beat most people in the chat, I'm willing to say.
exactly, exactly. She's like a pretty strong 1900 2000 player. And if you give her a position, and she loves this variation of the Scotch, where you go bishop b5, and it's like the Scotch gambit, I believe. Uh, I
That's
mean,
dangerous.
yeah,
I'm getting away from that.
she'll take you down. I mean, you'll be surprised. It's like, what happened? So, yep, Yvette's good. Is good, very, very good. Okay, now Queen E6, and we can see that. Okay, again, a very nice light square blockade. Uh, Black kind of, well, I mean, there is a pawn, but he's actually aspiring to Queen G6, doubling up against the knight on D3. And by the way, there are certain things that the G3 square could also be potentially weak as well. Knight G1. Um, Here's an interesting moment because for me, this move wasn't, um, I want to say, intuitively obvious. Okay. I'm thinking in my mind that as black, I really want to get my rook on A8 into the game. Okay. So for me, an intuitively obvious move is a move like rook D5, so that I can bring my rook anywhere to D8, to E8, to G8, right? I need to get the rook out of the way. I don't want to walk into a fork. I don't want to play rook to D7 and ever walk into a fork, right? So I was thinking rook d5, rook over, but I really like the move that Anish played, which is bishop h6. So at first sight, I was thinking to myself that this bishop is actually doing a very heroic job at protecting black's king. But at the same time, the bishop's view is really obscured by the pawn on e5. And once you look at the move bishop h6, you start to really warm up to that move. Well, first of all, it hits a pawn on f4, meaning that there are ideas of bishop takes d3 and bishop takes f4 check.
Yep.
It opens up the half open g file so that black can quickly play queen g6 and rook g8. And it just, the moment you see the move, you sort of go, yeah, that's a really good
Makes a good
move.
impression.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm talking about. Whereas I was thinking about the move rook d5 with the idea that I wanted to use my majority. I wanted to be able to play c5. The rook on d5 would support my doing that. I want to bring the other rook into the game, and so it was this kind of you know, what's the better choice? And I think that Anish in this case made a better choice. Knight f3. And now here Anish didn't follow up with what I thought his intention was. I thought he had intended, when he played the move bishop h5, to take and check. and do something of this nature, right? Just establishing his bishop on e3.
Yeah.
And there's no question in my mind that black is better. Anish felt that
He wanted to keep the pressure, I guess. He refused
right,
the pawn.
exactly. It's sort of like, hey, I don't want to prematurely cash in my chips. You're not doing anything with white. I can always play bishop takes d3 and bishop takes f4. In the meanwhile, come up with some kind of reasonable plan. Well, king h1 is the good point behind king h1 is it moves out of bishop takes f4 check, right?
Planning to lose a pawn.
Exactly, but not with check.
Yeah, never. He's improving the
Never with
loss of
check.
a pawn.
There goes the pawn. Queen c5, offering a trade.
Which
Take,
has to be accepted
accept.
because the bishop is
Right,
hanging.
exactly. The bishop was hanging. Oops, excuse me. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to say that the bishop was hanging to the knight on
Yes.
d. Yeah. Okay. Bishop c2. Rook takes, knight takes, bishop e3. Hold on. Sorry, bishop c2. Sorry, there was a very important right here. Bishop c2. That move was questioned. I want to put it like that. Both during and after the game, I think preferences were made for bishop e3. The idea was that after knight takes b7, rook d5, knight takes d4. I like that little crunchy sound that it makes.
When you take a pawn. I figured you would like that.
Exactly. It does feel really good. The material is even, but this bishop on g3 makes this really unpleasant feeling that white's king can really find itself in some trouble. And so I just wanted to say that back here, this was a very crucial moment. Anish did play the move bishop c2, but in perfect hindsight, perhaps bishop e3
Right.
would have led to an endgame advantage. Okay, bishop c2, rook takes d4, rook takes d4, rook takes d4, bishop e3. So Anish is thinking in the same way like that previous line, that he wants to see knight takes, knight takes c2, bishop takes c5. And the idea is that he wants to have white's king in kind of, I want to say no man's land, right? This kind
Yeah.
of a
Stuck.
area. Yeah, stuck. Knight e6, bishop g6, rook f3. And here Anish, slight time trouble, makes a mistake. Bishop h6. Not a good move. Better was bishop to c1. Obviously, just gift me the pawn. And if, for example, rook b3, I gave a variation that went like this. Some really horrible computer generated variation, but at the same time, also amazingly forcing. And we're seeing a kind of an echo, this like recurring theme of rook and bishop versus rook and knight, with white's king, again, a little bit in a no man's land. Having said that, the outcome of this whole long-winded variation is a fairly still balanced position. Black just is slightly for choice.
And the nice thing about the knight on e6, I guess back here, um,
Hmm.
is that in these positions, is the worst thing that could happen is sort of like black's rook, let's say, appears anywhere down here and checks the white king. And the nice
Yes,
thing about this knight is it covers the only two open files that black can use to do that. So it's also
right,
it's a sense of security. You have that knight on e6, and it makes the entire king position feel 10 times safer.
right. Like this great offensive beast on e6. It's doing this great defensive job at
Exactly.
stop preventing you from getting checked checked from behind.
That's right.
There we go. All right. So after bishop h6, now this ending um, stops to being in black's favor as it was previously. And here again, somehow uh, Anish loses complete understanding of what's going on. He should just move his bishop,
Bishop
like
c1
a
again.
move like bishop b6, for example, rook f4, rook e8. This would have been, you know, easy peace treaty in the offing. For some strange reason, right here, Anish played rook e8, going voluntarily into a slightly worse rook and pawn endgame. Why? Well, take a look. There, there are these double pawns, and this is a pass pawn. It's not going to be easy whatsoever for black to capture that pawn on e5. King g1, king g7, king f2. So here I'm just going to take a break. I don't want people to turn on their chess engines. I want you to analyze this position, and I don't really want you to calculate variations either. Calculating variations is very important when the position calls for calculations and sharp forcing play. This is more about strategic thinking. Imagine that you're black, you stand slightly worse in this rook ending. You can see that white wants to go king up, and take this pawn. And you've got to ask yourself, what is my piece configuration going to be? In other words, what do I want my rook to be doing? What do I want my king to be doing? I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break, and I'm going to be less than 5 minutes, but I want you to think strategically and to ask yourself how you would play this position with black, imagining that you're slightly worse. Okay, Aman? Okay. So here, what I want to hear from you, and if you had this concept about the position in your mind, bravo. The vast majority of rook and pawn endgames that you're ever going to play, and you're defending, again, we're imagining that black is worse here and he must defend. Every rook and pawn endgame requires that you activate your rook. You don't, as a defender in a rook and pawn endgame, you don't want an inactive rook. The rook on e6 is actually blockading the pawn, and it's a defensive rook. That rook would be much happier on, I don't know, d2 shack or d5 or any open file. In fact, what you really want to do as black is trade positions. Ideally, it would be the black king that is resting on the e6 square, and the rook could be on the g7 file for all I care. The king should be the blockader, the rook should be the active piece. And Anish went badly, badly wrong. he played the move king g6. And this gets him, he envisioned that this king is coming, as mentioned, to the g4 square. So he envisioned, Anish did, that his king was going to keep white's king out and that he's going to be doing really well by playing king g6. He should have played the move king f7. And for example, after a move like rook e4, attacking this pawn, rook h6, rook d4, king e7, we can just see how black's rook is active. It's going to keep white's king out of the position. Any king g4 moves going to be met by rook g6 with a check. And white quite simply cannot make progress. Now let's compare what happened in the game. In the game, after king g6, rook e4, rook e7, Anish is anticipating that any capture on h4 is going to be met by a capture on e5. King f3, again, ideas of a king g4. King f5. Now, at a certain moment, right, there's the last moment that Anish misses a chance to draw.
After this?
No, I think it actually comes here. King g6, rook g4. Yes, this is the blunder. This is the final mistake for sure, was rook e7. And it's very close to the time control too. He had to play instead. The only defense is h5. You got to take away control of the g4 square. That's absolutely crucial. Like one of the things that you can imagine, for example, is, oops, come on. There you go, king g5. King f3. I just want to make a bad move for black for just a moment. Check. You don't want something like this happen. Yeah, where the king kind of slaloms up the board, and escorts his pawn, and in the meanwhile, the black king is cut off.
And the move rook e7 is, to me, peculiar because I think I look at the position before rook e7 and the intentions are clear that every time rook takes h4 happens, we have rook takes e5, and
exactly.
as white, if nothing happens, let's say, then king to g4 wins the pawn. And also as black, after king f3, it's this weird position where I feel like king f5 never works because I take the pawn, and no matter how I take this guy, I'm losing, well, I'm trading pieces by rook h5 or rook e4 check, no matter how you take it. So to me, it's like the king can never approach the pawn because of that. And then it's like, okay, I'm running out of moves. This move takes away all the access and still keeps this alive.
Exactly.
And if we did something like this and I just waited, as long as I don't have this check, and as long as I don't put my king on f5, blundering this, then, sort of, it looks like it's fine again.
Yeah, you should be able to hang on.
And then, this one is a check, so we can get away with it. But I guess that was probably his last try, h5 here, because approaching the pawn, I just no way to get that to work, unfortunately.
Exactly. You got it all perfectly. Mind you, black is skirting the edge of disaster, and had he put his king on e6, there would have been no disaster at all. It would have been any troubles.
Did he think the pawn endgame was holdable by any stretch? It seemed weird how the piece is liquidated. Like, just suddenly the rooks are off, and to me, it's like every bone in my body is like, well, this is just lost.
Right. Right,
Um,
exactly, exactly. And you were talking about that line where rook takes h4, and if you take with the king, then I go rook e4, trade rooks. We're in a rook king upon endgame, or if you take on e5, I've got rook h5, I trade rooks. We're in a king upon endgame, and those king upon endgames are lost. And let's have a look as to how and why. So uh, what was very interesting is after the tournament, I'd gone to the Max Erva Center here in Amsterdam. Really a lovely center, a great museum that houses Max Erva's writings and his library, all of his papers. Along with being world chess champion, he was also the president of the FIDE, the World Chess Federation. So it's really nice to go there. And I had gone, I went there to do a little training, and I explained to the audience that this was a winning king and pawn endgame, and that um, the the alternative, king d6, that was not played by Anish does not save him. That king d6 would not have worked. The difference being that black is trying to create a passer over here on the queen side,
right.
uh, while white is trying to create a passer over on the king side. And it's really an interesting judgment, because at the move king d6, one of the audience members had analyzed this ending with his stockfish 10, right?
Man, I don't know where this story is going, but I always think back to the candidates when people in the audience try to come at the players with a rehearsed line that they've got
Exactly.
doctored on their computer, and then
Right.
the Grishuk or someone will just say a simple thing like, but what about this? And suddenly they've completely out of it. They have no suggestions, no knowledge about the position.
Right. Right. Exactly. So the idea was that king d6, according to the stockfish 10.0, was good enough to draw. And the guy had,
Yeah,
it
pages
all
of analysis.
right. Bingo bongo. And I likened the situation to the artist zoo, artis, artis, the artist zoo here in Amsterdam. And they have a specimen, I'm not kidding. This guy's like an 800-pound silverback gorilla. This guy is one of the biggest gorillas in captivity that I've ever seen in my life. The guy's just a monster, right? And he's got this playground area where there's this metal uh, thing that you can go crawl on that kids usually
The monkey
play.
bars?
Yeah.
Something
And
like
he
that.
goes and he sits on top of this thing, like, in regal, on his throne, right? But his favorite play toy is like this 700-pound tire,
I
right?
really like where the story is going.
Exactly. This monster tire that, is for these trucks that carry 30,000 tons of dirt and stuff. And he takes this tire and he drags it up the playground, the monkey bars, and he bites into the tire and he rips it apart piece by piece. You can't do that. You're not supposed to be able to rip apart this tire, but this gorilla can. I think of the stockfish as the tire, and I just rip apart the stockfish. So it was really,
So
really
you're
fun.
saying that you are the 900-pound gorilla.
Yeah, and the stockfish was the 700-pound tire.
Right.
And it was really, really funny because the the fellow in the audience, he had really worked it out with Stockfish, and this is a very, very funny ending. And the idea of the ending is, if you think about it from White's point of view, after the move King D6, what's the most natural move in the position for White to make, in your view, Aman?
G4.
Exactly. So after G4, the uh, the computer works G4 out to a draw, right? And the counterintuitive move wins. The counterintuitive move H4 wins. And the idea behind H4 is that you want to put your pawn on H6, but you don't want to put your pawn on G4 because Black's king is going to be distracted. Black's king is going to run across the board and capture the H pawn. White's king is going to run the other way, capture the C5 pawn. And you want your pawn on G2. So it's far away from Black's king when he captures the pawn on H6. At the same time, because the pawn is on H6, Black has no choice. He can't stay on the queen side with his king on C6, shouldering White's king away, because G4, G5, G6 will win the game.
It's quite a long journey
Yeah,
he's gonna have to take there.
yeah. So, oops, sorry. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that it's a very unusual king and pawn endgame where the most natural move G4 uh, actually doesn't win the game.
Yeah, that's weird.
Isn't it?
That would be my move. Let's say, yeah, G4 here.
Exactly. So let's say G4, let's say C5.
Mm-hmm.
And now the problem is that Black is, yeah, G5. I think, hold on, what did I analyze? I think I analyzed C4. King? And should I play? Now I have, now
now you're the guy in the audience with the line.
Yeah, now I'm unarmed and I'm trying to figure out what did I do? C5. Pardon me, B5. Yeah. And H4, and let's say, okay, hold on. So here, does B4, King D4, C3
I think that draws.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
have a feeling that's got to be it, because
That's got to be it.
I'm gonna have to waste a move playing H5 here, because I assume that this race Black is able to, yeah, he's fine. So I'm gonna have to do this, and this is obviously
yeah,
this has got to work out for Black, right? There's no
exactly
way.
Exactly.
By one tempo.
There you go. Okay. So the idea was to leave the pawn on G2 where it was really a distance ways away. And that, by the way, is a moment where calculation is required. Yeah. So before you play the move G4, it's no longer strategical, wistful thinking of where my king would be best placed. It's just direct move on move. In the game, it was a very straightforward win by Firouzja.
Yeah, it really looks straightforward.
Yeah, it was really, there was nothing to it whatsoever. Now,
there wasn't even any like, oh, you played a logical move, but it doesn't work. It's like, yeah, you just played every logical move and hey, they work.
Exactly. So it was this game that really turned the tide for both players. Firouzja, like suddenly burst into our consciousness as maybe the most talented 16-year-old on the planet. I mean, I don't know who else could compete, by the way,
Yep.
and a likely, contender for the world championship in the near future. And there's, Anish Giri, like, hey, I'm a candidate. I'm going to be playing for the world championship
You
challenger
don't know who
position.
you talking to, boy.
Exactly, exactly. Getting out dueled there in the end. But on the other hand, Anish really outplayed him from the opening, had a great middle game position. He had the upper hand, but really at the end of the time control, of the first time control, really slipped badly, and Firouzja ended up winning a really nice ending.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
This was really nice.